war between China and the United States, is it inevitable? Is it avoidable? Is it something that either side actually wants? Or is it something that we can find a way to navigate away from for the benefit of everybody? I think we know what should be the right answer, but we're going to see what is the right answer because a lot of people have some different views on that. And I think a lot of the desires of people are kind of a little shady, if you'll forgive the possibility that some people seem to not be afraid of war like they really ought to be. And we're going to dig into this today with the guest that we haven't had on our show yet. I've been on his show a couple of times, and I'm really grateful to have Cyrus Janssen on today, host of the Cyrus Janssen Show, the wildly successful Cyrus Janssen Show on YouTube. And he's got some great insights that you might not even know about. Cyrus, welcome to our show.
Danny, thank you so much. Thanks for the kind words. And it's an absolute pleasure to be on your show today and talking about something that is very important for the future of our world, something very important to me as an American that used to live in China for many years and obviously have a great respect and admiration for both countries and want to see a world where both countries can succeed.
Yeah, and saying that's one of the reasons why I sought you out, because there is no shortage of China hawks, which we're going to show a few clips of here in a moment. And some people on the other side that want to say, yeah, China should do whatever they want to do. But there's not many that are kind of like saying, no, I want the best for actually both peoples. It's one of the things that I at least I personally feel, especially as one who's gone to combat 4 times and served in the military, have seen war up front and personal. I know that there are no winners. It's usually destructive, and the biggest bill payers, as we're seeing all over both the Middle East and in Europe right now, are just the regular people in the middle that don't seem to have much of a voice and a say in what happens to their country, but what happens at the top.
Right.
They are the ones that pay the worst for it. And I absolutely value the people in China, and certainly the value the people in our country and Taiwan, all of them. Nobody needs a war. Everybody can live peacefully together. There's room for everybody. That's kind of the general motto I have, but I want to look at some specific things. But first of all, I wonder if you could just kind of, for our audience to understand, when you say you've lived in China for 10 years, what did you do there?
Yeah, so I actually started my career back in 2007, and I actually worked in the golf and sports industry. So I specifically went to China to work in that industry, worked my way up to being the general manager of a sports marketing company that was based in Hong Kong. And so I was in a very interesting time in China where there was a lot of robust growth. 2007 was the year that China's economy grew by 14%. It was really a huge time to be in China. Of course, 2008 was the Beijing Olympics, which was really China's kind of coming out party. They really were saying, hey, we're here on the international stage. We're hosting the Olympics for the first time. And, all of the energy and all of the momentum in Asia was certainly being felt in China that was just continuing to grow and grow. 2010, I was living in Shanghai, and that's when Shanghai hosted the most successful World Expo in history. It was an amazing time of growth, specifically for the city of Shanghai. That World Expo lasted for 6 months, a tremendous amount of visitors. I think well over 100 million people came and visited that pavilion over that 6 months. And it was a great time to just be in China, see that. I moved down to Hong Kong, still did a lot of business between mainland and Hong Kong. So it was just a really great time of my life to, as a young man, starting my career, but it was a great time to be in China, really understand a lot more about Chinese culture, Chinese people, and just really how China functions in our world economy.
And what kind of reception did you have? Because I think there's a lot of views in the United States that China views Americans with suspicion, if not derision, that they're hostile towards us. How did you find just the Chinese people?
Oh, I mean, Chinese people are incredible. I mean, honestly, it's just and that really, Daniel, that really remains the same as 2007 when I first went, and even last year when I went back last summer. I mean, I had people. Obviously, I look very different. It's very easy to determine that I'm a foreigner. I'm also quite tall. I'm 6'4", so I stand out. In China with being the tall white guy with blue eyes. But people love. I mean, people will come up to you and just ask you, where are you from? Oh, you're from America. Oh, great. Immediately thumbs up, 美国很好, like America's great. And, they've always been very receptive. And I think what was really interesting is that last summer when I went back, I had people say, thanks for coming to China. Thanks for coming to China in 2023, because it's not like it was before. And, after COVID, there's a lot less foreigners in China. So there was almost an appreciation of, wow, you've really come to China. You've really, you're willing to come here now. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming and seeing China with your own eyes. But I mean, I have never once had any hostility towards me as a foreigner. And anytime that I tell people I'm American, the reception is always good. I always kind of sum it up this way: is that Chinese people, they love Americans. They love American people. They love American culture. They might not be a fan of the United States government and some of the decisions that they make, but they also realize that you and I are American citizens. It doesn't mean that what Washington does, that doesn't say that we might not agree with that, or we have no control over that. So
Yeah,
they're going to hold us accountable for what Washington is doing.
that's
They are
interesting.
very, very open to foreigners. And I think the big thing is if you go to China with an open mind and just a willingness to say, hey, I want to go to China and just experience it and just kind of see what it's really like, you're going to really come away with some amazing experiences and your expectations will be blown away.
And I actually have a little bit of family ties to that part of the world myself. My
Okay.
mother's brother, my uncle, spent 30 years as a missionary in Hong Kong and was
Wow.
completely fluent in Mandarin and absolutely fell in love with the people there,
Yeah.
which is why he stayed so long. In fact,
Yeah.
only his health is what made him come back to here. But so
Okay. Yeah.
that's a consistent story that the people, and I've really found this everywhere. That means
Yeah.
Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Germany when I lived there, South Korea, everywhere I've been, and especially in our country here, the regular people, there's wonderful people everywhere. And that's why
Agreed.
I'm so against war and
Yeah.
anything trying to solve it through that, because there's the ones that pay the biggest price. And most of these wars are not even necessary. Now, I
Yeah.
want to shift gears in there and see if we can talk about some things that maybe we can help avoid an unnecessary war here, because
Yeah.
that is not as easy as it sounds, because there's a lot of people who actually seem to want one, or to want to be real belligerent towards pushing us in policies that might make it more likely, not less. And I want to start off here because I'm going to show you a piece here from last year by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's talking about something that's a real common in many circles here in Washington, D.C., and that's the so-called porcupine strategy. They want to arm Ukraine. They want to arm Taiwan to the teeth to make any potential attack by China as untenable so that they won't do it. Here's the way he put it.
We should provide the Taiwanese today, not 6 months from now, not when the Chinese PLA is invading the island, or when the Chinese Communist Party's Air Force is flying around, or the Navy blockading the island. We should provide them today the tools that they need to convince and deter Xi Jinping from taking aggressive military action against Taiwan.
Now, on one of your previous shows, you have a slightly different take upon what deterrence actually means in relation to China when you said this.
Right now, US politicians are obsessed with selling arms to Taiwan, moving key technologies out of Taiwan and into the United States, and in their minds, doing everything they can to deter China from using aggressive military force against Taiwan. But US politicians have completely missed the mark. The issues surrounding Taiwan can't be solved by focusing on Taiwan. Let me say that again. This problem has nothing to do with Taiwan. Instead, it has everything to do with a deteriorating US-China relationship and the need to find a solid foundation for US-China relations.
So that's counterintuitive to what most in America think, certainly those who have been following forward policy, that
Right.
it's not about Taiwan, but about this other thing. So I wonder if you can tell me why it's not
Yeah.
about Taiwan and why it is about our relationship and what we can do about it.
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I'm glad you're asking it. So, I want to go back really to the very beginning of US China relations, because when President Nixon went to China, met with Zhou Enlai, his Chinese counterpart, and what really happened, this is very interesting, is that the very first thing that came out of Zhou Enlai's mouth was, we need to talk about Taiwan. So again, let's go back in time. This is 1972. The United States does not have formal relations with China. And yet the first thing that China's government does is they sit Nixon down and they say, what we need to do is we actually need to discuss the cornerstone of the future relationship between our two countries. Now, the cornerstone is actually going to be how we recognize Taiwan. And that means is that if the United States wants to have formal relations with China, you must adhere to the one China policy, which means that Taiwan is a part of China. If you can agree to that and you recognize that, then we can have formal relations. If you cannot, that is a red flag. That is a red line that cannot be crossed. And basically, we will not have diplomatic relations with you. Now, that policy basically still exists to this day. So every single country in the world that has diplomatic relations with China, they must adhere to the one China policy. And that's something that not many people actually know. So it's not, for example, sometimes people might say, Cyrus, do you support an independent Taiwan? And I will say, well, to be honest with you, my United States government doesn't support an independent Taiwan. If you go and ask President Joe Biden right now, do you support an independent Taiwan? He will say clearly, absolutely not. We adhere to the one China policy. That's the same in France, Germany, Australia, Japan, every major economy. And basically, there's around 12 nations in the world that actually recognize Taiwan instead of China. Now, those nations are very small. There's basically, these are like the tiny micronations outside of Australia, and very, very small economies. No major economy or major country in the world recognizes Taiwan over China. It's the opposite. They all want to establish relations with China, and that's really what I mean by this. Is that the issue here is, because the United States-China relationship is deteriorating, Taiwan is again becoming an issue. So if we really want to solve the Taiwan issue, we need to have better relations. And again, when I went to China in 2007 to 2013, I mean, there was no issue with Taiwan. I mean, that was really just
let me ask
we
you
weren't talking about that at all.
Before you shift to the second part about the improving, deteriorating relations, because I think that's where you can actually make some money and make something work out there.
Right.
But touch right on the premise that Pompeo issued there, which is almost a matter of belief that everybody has, or many people have here, is that, but if you'll provide enough weapons to Taiwan, then China won't be able to attack. They'll be deterred, so they won't ever act on that. How do you view that?
I mean, I think what's interesting in that regard is that it certainly does help Taiwan to aid them with weapons. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, if let's say that Taiwan had no weapons at all, then they could be. You could make the argument that obviously Taiwan would be much more vulnerable. But I think what I look at in that is that what's happening here is that we kind of basically say something and then do the opposite. For example, we'll come out and we'll say, okay, we recognize that Taiwan is part of China. We want to improve relations. And then we, kind of have this big meeting where we're going to say all these things. And then right after the meeting, the next week, it's like, okay, we've just approved another, $100 million in arms sales to Taiwan. And so from China's perspective, it's like, well, you're always saying one thing, you're doing the opposite. You're saying you respect that Taiwan's part of us, but then you're also, selling them weapons. I mean, the other thing is as we know, the military industrial complex makes a lot of money. And, Taiwan is a very lucrative client, if you will. I mean, we sell them a lot of weapons. It's very lucrative for our weapon manufacturers. And I think the more kind of thing that I'm a little bit more disturbed with when you look at a guy like Michael Pompeo is, selling weapons to Taiwan is one thing. But one of the things that Pompeo has been very clear is that he wants to move away from, the status quo. He wants to move away from strategic ambiguity. And he very much is along the lines of strategic clarity. And in his mind, and he said it many times, that he wants to declare Taiwan independent. And he wants to move away from the status quo. And that is playing with fire. And that is absolutely going to get you in a massive war and confrontation.
And what's the value?
with China.
I don't get, because I didn't know that he particularly supported that. But I have been reading many people, especially over the summer. So a lot of people were talking about strategic clarity and all this. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand the logic to where you're saying, China has this massive red line, which they've said nothing different since 1949, that somehow that would improve things for either Taiwan or for the United States. I just don't see where I don't understand the logic behind wanting to move to strategic clarity, knowing the red lines.
I think, ultimately, when you have someone like a Michael Pompeo saying that, it's just they're a warmonger. They want to get into a confrontation with China, and it's incredibly short-sighted because, Daniel, as you know, the United States and China going into an active war, that is a loss for the entire world. I mean, that's going to devastate the U.S. economy. It's going to devastate the Chinese economy. But you've got the number 1 and 2 countries in the world going at it in a conflict. That's the whole world loses. And that's what people don't understand. And I think what it is he's just saying this kind of nonsense rhetoric really to kind of, draw attention to him and to try to bring some
Make people want to buy more weapons.
Make people want to buy more weapons. And also, don't forget, Michael Pompeo, he's now no longer in the government and he's working in the private sector. Last year, he was paid a very handsome fee to fly to Taiwan and basically give a 30-minute speech. He was paid $300,000 US to fly first class to Taipei, give a 30-minute speech. give a 30-minute speech in front of a pro-independent crowd and basically just say those points. It's just talking points. Hey, you know what I think we should do? We should move to strategic clarity. Taiwan should be independent. This should be independent. US should have your back. We're going to fight China. Now, of course, all the pro-independent people in Taiwan very happy about that, and money well spent. You get to have all these sound clips. You get to have Michael Pompeo, former Secretary of State in Taipei, saying this speech. But I mean, that, there's a lot of financial incentive there too. Hey, $300,000 for a 30-minute speech, first class trip, a little holiday over to Taiwan. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. But that's that. You also have to question, where is his integrity there? Is he just trying to make a quick buck? Does he really mean the words that he's saying? Or is he just realize, hey, this is a lucrative opportunity that I can go over there, say these things, and just kind of, preach to the choir here. Yeah. But, as far as these pro-independent people, but I want to give you a really big thing is that most people in Taiwan do not want to move to independence. That's something that we have. So again, it's like you're actually going against the will of the Taiwanese people themselves, right? Taiwanese people want to avoid a war with China. They don't want to take on China. They don't want to have any confrontation. And this is an issue, is that when Michael Pompeo goes to Taipei, that's being reported in Western media. What you don't see is that there's many protesters outside his hotel. There's many people protesting the venue that he's giving a speech, saying, no, get out of here. Go back to the United States. Stop coming here and speaking this nonsense. Because again, now I'm not going to say that there's not pro-independent people in Taiwan. There certainly is. Yeah, right. But it's not like, it's not like you have an entire island full of people begging for independence. Most people are in the middle. Hey, you know what? Let's continue the status quo. The last thing we want is a war. We want peace. All we've heard for our entire lives is, China's going to attack us. But you know what? We're doing fine. Taiwan's growing. Like, we're doing our thing. Let's just kind of let us get on with our lives here in Taiwan. And, we need to respect the will of the Taiwanese people as well. And, not force them into something. And I guarantee you, declaring independence is not what the majority of Taiwanese people want.
Nor will it help the island itself, nor will it help us, nor our allies in the region. But we'll talk about that in a second. But now let's shift to the second part of your contention there, that the key to keeping China from attacking Taiwan is improving relations between U.S. and China. So what do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think what we've seen with President Biden in his term so far is that no less than 6 times has he come out and said things that would almost counter that one China policy. He said, like, hey, if China attacks, we're going to go in and we're going to support, we're going to put troops on the ground. We're going to do this. Well, we're going to, he's misspoken several times where, he said something and then almost immediately within minutes, White House staff is having to correct him. No, he misspoke. We still adhere to the one China policy. The president didn't mean what he meant, what he said. This is actually, again, we agree with the one China policy. So again, we have to be very clear in what our messaging is to China, because that is the big issue, is that if we say one thing and do the other, then it's ingenuine to the Chinese. They're looking at us like, well, do you really support the one China policy? Or are you just saying that because, like that's what you have to say? Or do you really actually want to move towards an independence? So I think what my basic takeaway on this is that if there is a risk for a war in the Taiwan Strait, if there is a risk for war, the ball is in the United States court. It really depends on how we want to handle the situation. If we continue to have politicians, mainly from the right wing, that are very, very, very hawkish and very aggressive towards China, saying, look, let's move to strategic clarity, let's declare an independent Taiwan, then that will provoke China. They will absolutely, that's a red line that can't be crossed. So they will act on that. But I have theories on why China will not attack. Maybe we can get into that later. But, I don't believe that China is going to attack Taiwan anytime soon. Okay. And there are many reasons why I feel that way.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I do want to touch on that in just a second, because we got something that's going to lead right into that, actually, because there are some other voices in the United States which actually say it's not just that we want to help Taiwan gain independence, but actually we got to provide arms and weapons to Taiwan because China is getting ready to attack, like this clip here.
China is developing the capabilities to have a war with the United States, and not a defensive war. This is an offensive war to take it to the United States. Just look at their strategic capabilities, look at their military spending and investments, which actually are on par with the United States. So of course they're developing this capability. But what I'd say is this is not like Germany in 1914 or 1939. This is not, we're going to attack somebody at a set date in the future. This is much more like what the Soviet Union did. we're going to build a massive offensive capability. We're going to use it to cow and threaten other people. But you know what? There might come a day, if our enemies look weak, when we might actually use that.
So he's suggesting that actually they're like looking for an opportunity to attack. Now, some people would say that's not an unreasonable position because look at what Xi Jinping says.
Command Center of the Central Military Commission and urged troops to enhance training and combat preparedness. He said the People's Liberation Army needs to safeguard China's dignity and core interests. Xi's war cry is being seen as a threat to Taiwan, the self-governing island which Beijing claims as its own.
But you have said actually that's the kind of war that we've seen in between Russia and Ukraine is not what we need to worry about, but there's a different aspect of war, not even what Carafana was thinking about when you said this.
Every day, the United States and China are marching closer to war. And while images of a destroyed Ukraine are fresh in all our minds, let's be clear. It's highly unlikely the US and China will be involved in this type of military conflict. China and the US are too smart for this type of escalation. Instead, a different type of battle has already begun, and it's being conducted in research laboratories and behind computer screens. Artificial intelligence is changing the world as we know it, but here is something you don't know. AI could give those who master it an economic and military edge in future geopolitical contests.
So I want you to address the two things there. First of all, is China looking to attack? And then second, that second very important part about that actually AI might be the battle, because that's not intuitive to most Americans.
For sure. I think I want to first address that first clip because I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and this is the kind of brainwashing and propaganda that's coming from the United States that is honestly I can't fathom it, to be honest, because I guarantee you the guy that said that clip, I'm not sure his name, but he says that, he's basically saying that that China is looking for an opportunity. If your enemy is weak, that they're looking for an opportunity to attack the United States. Now, this is quite interesting to me because you have China. Here you have China. This is a country that has not so much as fired a single bullet on foreign soil in the last 45 years. Okay, they're supposed to be the big attack. Meanwhile, the United States has been involved.
When you put it like that, yeah.
I mean, the United States has been involved in 13 wars in the 21st century alone, the vast majority of which we have actually been directly the cause of. So, I mean, you look at the United States, our military interventions across the world. I mean, you look at how unstable the Middle East is over the last 2 decades. Most of it from, again, United States military interventions and just our complete, failure to understand what's really happening in that region of the world. But yet again, China's the aggressive one, okay, who hasn't been in a war in 45 years. And the United States is supposed to be this peaceful nation that, again, is once again, is the peace-loving nation, is the innocent party. To me, it's absolutely preposterous because I don't believe that China looks at the United States as an enemy. I think that let's be realistic. It's certainly a rivalry. There's definitely a rivalry between the United States and China, and we'll go into that with the AI in a second.
Okay.
But there's also a tremendous economic interdependence. And this is something that most Americans don't realize. A couple of weeks ago, I visited the world's largest tech show in the world. It's here in Las Vegas. It's called CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. And I made a video going around the show talking to all of these amazing companies. And when you go to the shows like that, it's incredible because China's footprint on the tech world and just how all of these companies are functioning is incredible. And everybody that's there is doing business. They understand the global economy. They understand how connected the US and Chinese economies are. The people that don't get that are, people that just have this America only thinking. Sometimes you have these politicians saying, we should completely economically decouple from China. We don't want to have any factories or any connections back to China. It's completely unrealistic. There's zero chance that could ever happen. So I think that you're going to,
without devastating our own economy, that is.
Absolutely. I mean, we would destroy the United States economy in trying to do so. But what I want people to understand is that there's a disconnect between what politicians say and then when you actually go to the real world and talk to businessmen and actually leaders that are making money and actually growing this economy, they have a very different interpretation of what's going on. I guarantee you that gentleman that said that China is looking to attack the United States, I almost guarantee he's never spent a day in China. And if he has, then he's completely ignorant. And the reality is the same thing you opened the show up with today, Danny, as you said, how was it perceived when you're there as an American in China? Chinese are always open to Americans. They're always looking to do business. Chinese, they're some of the most savvy businessmen in the world. You go there, I mean, they don't care. They don't care about, different style forms of government or democracy or communism. You know what they want to do? They want to make money. They want to do business with you. Hey, you're an American. Hey, how can we do business? Let's do some more business between the two of our countries. That's what Chinese people are interested in doing. I don't think that, again, there's no way that China is going to look for a moment that the United States is weak and then launch an attack against the United States. Absolutely will not happen at all. And it's preposterous to say, to even suggest that. I mean, it really shows you that you don't have any insights into China nor any understanding of a global economy. Because again, let's just look on the track record. China's never invaded in the last 45 years. They haven't been involved in a war. What would be the point of that? What's the advantage? Right.
Yeah.
I've seen some very big anti-China YouTubers saying, oh, look at this spy balloon. When they launched that spy balloon, they could potentially drop nukes on the United States. What would be the tangible benefit of that? China drops a nuke on the United States. What do you think is going to happen? Damn well that we're going to come, the United States is going to respond, but
plus they don't need a balloon for that. I'll just point that out.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, but again, we're going to this line of thinking that people are becoming so irrational that they're not using common sense anymore, Danny.
So let me ask you this. What do you say when people then throw up now? We'll separate the idea that what I'm about to say has any justification for war. It doesn't, but some people do make the connection. Yet they do say, okay, yeah, sure, China wants to make a buck. They want to make business, but they're also using all these illegal business practices. They're stealing intellectual property. They're doing things that are harmful to our economy, et cetera. And then, the whole thing about the so-called genocide they have with the Uyghurs and all that, which are human rights things, which people love. Pompeo's a big one throwing that one out there. What do you say about those two issues?
Well, I think what's interesting is when you look at like the World Trade Organization, and I think when China was admitted in 1997, 99, I think somewhere in there, kind of late 1990s, there was this belief from the United States that okay, we're gonna admit China into the WTO, and they're gonna see these benefits. And what we want them to do is we want them to switch from a communist government. We want them to embrace a liberal democracy. That is our plan of that is what we're hoping for. Now that's a very unrealistic hope because there was no implications from China saying that, okay, yes, we're going to do that. China has its own way of governing and it's a very different system. And I'm a very big proponent that, every country in the world has to figure out what is the right form of government for them. It's not like I'm pro-communist. It's not like I'm anti-democracy. I think democracy is great. But what the reality is that every nation has to figure out the best system from them. If you compare democracy in Canada versus democracy in the United States, it's completely different, right? Different countries, different culture, different values. It's set up in a different way. So I think with that is, when we look at World Trade Organization, we can make the argument that, okay, China has violated many policies in there. We need to hold them accountable. Absolutely. I think we should. But I also want to point out that the United States has also violated many WTO trade policies with Europe. Actually, there's more trade violations going on between U.S. and Europe right now than between, U.S. and China. So there's a lot of things that, that we can, we need to hold each other accountable. It's the same thing when we talk about human rights. I mean, the interesting thing is that we've heard of these things called a genocide happening in the Xinjiang region. The reality is that term genocide is a very, very specific term. You cannot just throw that term out there lightly. Now, what's really difficult is that we're looking at what's happening, unfortunately, in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, and you have the International Court of Justice who 2 weeks ago ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide against the people in Gaza. You look at what's happening in Gaza, there is nothing like that happening in Xinjiang. I mean, not even close to that. So, has there been human rights violations in Xinjiang? That's absolutely a potential there. And that's something that should be investigated in. But the reality is that it's nowhere close to being a genocide. You have to completely reframe that and say that, no, there absolutely is no genocide going on because, China's not slaughtering tens of thousands of innocent people. China is not destroying, the infrastructure and completely just making it unlivable. That is basically what's happening in Gaza right now. Right. is that Israel is going on a campaign not to eliminate Hamas. They were going on a campaign to destroy everything in Gaza to make it almost unlivable for the future. Yep. And we are enabling that. That war, against Gaza would not be possible without United States help, right? We sell our weapons to Israel. We are the number one security asset, an ally to Israel. And so I think that's a really big thing, Daniel, when we're talking about, you want to talk about human rights. this is the biggest human rights story that's going on right now.
Right. Yeah,
And
you
this
might
is
wanna shift to
why,
that.
China, Russia, Iran, they're not caring what the United States is saying, because there's a
Yeah.
huge double standard going on right now.
Yeah, we've been talking about that on some of our other shows, and one earlier today. But now I want to go back to the AI thing, because that's one thing I think it's not intuitive that people understand. So when you say that that's something Americans don't know, educate us.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is really transforming the future of our world. And when I went to CES, the largest tech show, a few weeks ago. I mean, Apple launched their Vision Pro. I mean, you've got all of these, everything, basically every booth is AI, 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 and that's something that both the United States and China are doubling down in. So I think when you're looking at the future battle of this, is that artificial intelligence is going to play a very large part of our future world, and it certainly could give some more strategic capabilities to whoever wins that race. Now, I think one of the interviews that I did, when I interviewed actually one of the number one most outspoken metaverse and AI expert in the world, and I sat down with an interview with him, and he said a really important takeaway here is that actually, no, we don't want any one nation or one person or one country to have all of the AI power. AI really should exist in kind of an open community, and it's one where we all want to be winning together. Because if anybody does develop that technology and has kind of a monopoly on that, then it could be used for bad. And that's
Yeah.
something that all of us would lose. So it is something that both the U.S. and China are working towards. Anything basically AI related, and China is getting the green light from the government. They're publishing more research papers on that. The scientists are working harder than ever on that. So I think it's really important that again, that we need to monitor that as well, and we need to see how we can hopefully build more things together. I'm one for the United States and China working together and trying to figure out ways that we can partner, and that we can be working on these AI projects together. Interesting enough, I mean, it was China's government that is first having, it's China's government that is saying, hey, we should have some government regulation in here, before this gets out of control, because we want to, just for the sake of privacy for our, for the users, and even just things like data collection. I mean, China was very big on that as far as social media, saying, warning about the dangers of social media, and saying, look, we need to monitor what's going on. For example, China put limits in for children under the age of 18, trying to protect those children. And that's a huge debate here in the United States, where, we have an open free internet, and, Facebook, Twitter, things like that are being brought before the U.S. Congress, saying, look, is this harmful to our children here in the United States? All of this is related. All of this will continue to be a big issue moving forward.
So you brought introduced the topic in the context of a lot of people are saying that there could be war one day between U.S. and China. So what are your concerns about AI development, and could it give one side or the other advantage if there actually is a physical war?
I mean, I think it could, but I think what my main point with that is that I think our battle is going to be more behind computer screens and trying to figure out, the AI element of it, as opposed to I think China and the United States are too smart to get into a physical to actual military conflict, because I think if that happens,
You
again,
have more confidence than I do, I'll
yeah.
say. I have more worries about that, but
I call me an optimist. I'm always a guy half glasses half full as opposed to half empty. I mean, I have hope that that our U.S. politicians do not drag us into a physical war with China. And I know that China doesn't want a war, because, I mean, who wants to go to war against the United States? We're a pretty big military force, and we're certainly a force to be reckoned with. I mean, that's again going back to that point of why I think it's preposterous to say that China is going to start a war by physically attacking the United States,
right,
because you're not going to want to bring that wrath out.
and I actually want your view on this, that there's no question that the Chinese military has gone through an extraordinary amounts of development and advancement and growth. And Xi Jinping does say that we need to prepare for war. So it seems that if something pushes his red line, which you touched on earlier in this broadcast, that they could actually go to war over Taiwan. And I just wonder if that happens, how do you see their military performing? Or do you think that they just will continue to let the thing go down the road, and they actually won't?
Let me address that, because this is basically what many people look at. Is they look at one graph. They say, let's look at China's military expenditures over the last 30 years. And what they'll say is, back from 1990 until 2023, basically that has 10x'd. So China is spending 10 times more on military than they were in 1990. And that is that basically they're concluding from that dramatic graph that shows a very steep increase in military spending. They're saying this is the evidence that China is getting ready for war. Now, let me give you the other half of the equation that Western media will never tell you. If you actually look at China's military spending as a percentage of GDP, it's actually decreased over
Really?
it's actually decreased over that 30-year period. So back in 1990, although the actual dollar amount was certainly less, it was a higher percentage of their GDP than it is last year. Now, the other thing is General Mark Miley, the
Yeah.
commander-in-chief, I think highest
Former
ranking.
chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Thank you. That's the correct title. He came out and said, he's like, we expect China to be building their military because that's what superpowers do, right?
Yeah.
If you're a superpower, you're going to increase your military spending. Like best example, the United States. I mean, we spend so much money on our military. We continue to increase that budget every single year. And the reality is that China increasing its military is not anything out of the ordinary. It's nothing. You would expect that from the second largest country in the world. But I think that's the big takeaway. I want your viewers and my viewers that are watching this to understand is that yes, China's expenses or military expenditures, over the last 30 years has 10x, no doubt about that. But as a percentage of GDP, it's actually declined. And the reality is if you look at that map, how many United States military bases surround China? Again, you can make the argument, well, China wants to be prepared just in case anything does happen that they could militarily respond. So again, I don't think that it is, I don't think it's
preparing for an offensive. But would they go to war if we pushed a red line?
If we pushed a red line, I like for example, if the United States came out and said, let's just say that Joe Biden, was reelected and he said, okay, the first thing I'm going to do in my second term, we are officially declaring Taiwan independent and we will now make a move to recognize them in the United Nations. We will now establish formal diplomatic relations and establish them as a country in this world. That will be a red line, and China absolutely will take action on that. So again, the ball is in the court of the United States and our government. If they go down that road, China will respond. China's not going to take that. That again, let's go back to 1972 when it was actually Henry Kissinger. I think I said that earlier a little bit wrong because it was Kissinger that first went over to meet with Zhou Enlai, not Nixon, but it was Kissinger who sat down, and it was Zhou Enlai who, again, let's go back to the very beginning. The very first thing we got to talk about if we're going to have these relations, U.S.-China relations, it deals with Taiwan. So that's a fundamental shift. And again, the U.S., this one China principle has guided our relationship for 50 plus years. Okay, we've had a very good U.S.-China relationship for 50 plus years by adhering to this. So if there is a strategic change in there, China will go in and they will say, no, absolutely not. What we're going to do is if you're going to say that they're independent, we're now going to militarily go in and we're going to make sure that this is our territory and you will not come in here. You will not do this. And so that's the red line that would be crossed.
And so I'm guessing, based on what you tell me about how much the Chinese people and government value business and succeeding, and that they have restrained themselves from any foreign wars, that it would have to be a really big crossing of the red line to make them actually initiate conflict.
Yes.
Is that a fair
Absolutely.
thing?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be something like that, like the scenario that I laid out, and again, I don't think Biden would do that. I don't think that, I don't think the United States would make such a bold move because they're not stupid. I mean, I think they would know, okay, if we cross this, like we're going to go into conflict with China. Are we ready for this? Is this something that we want to do right now when, hey, 2024, the U.S. economy isn't as performing as well? I mean, it's not like our economy is growing robustly either. So, I mean, do we really want to take that step? Do we really want to engage China into a conflict? Do we want to have U.S. troops on the ground in Taiwan getting into an open conflict with, the PLA? Is that something that we really want to do? I mean, they'll know that. If they make that move, that's what's going to happen.
So let me ask you this, Neil. In the last few minutes we have time here, there's been lots of senior U.S. naval leaders, especially admirals in the Pacific Command, over the last couple of years, have been saying that they think China has a timeline on there. One is as early as 2025. Some of it said it's 2028 or a little bit further. But they also say that, no, they think they're on the way. And so, ergo, we need to increase the number of bases that we have, the number of ships and all that, on top of what you just described there. How do you see that dynamic playing out?
I think an interesting one is that if you look at if Xi Jinping comes out and says, we need to be prepared by 2027, 2028, whatever the timeline is given, if the interesting thing is that Xi Jinping's never said that, right? These timelines always come from the US military. It's like we estimate it's 2025, 2027, 2028. Those are coming from, like you said, these high-ranking Navy officers. So it's not like China has given this timeline. But if that is, if you know what that essentially means right now is that China's not ready. China's not militarily ready to do that. I think there's a few things that I want to just kind of add to this to the table here. Is that number one, launching an offensive against Taiwan is extremely difficult, right? It would be an amphibious invasion, which is the most difficult one to do in military conflict. Number two, you got to look at it from the Chinese perspective. What do we actually gain from invading Taiwan, right? For example, every nation in the world, every major economy, every major country already recognizes that Taiwan is part of China. You look at 1.4 billion people in China; they already recognize, that Taiwan is part of their country. I mean, it's basically there's really nothing to economically gain from that. If anything, it's everything to lose. There's not really any. Again, there's no advantage. Like, what is the point of actually invading Taiwan for China? Right? Again, they will invade if they have to. If they're going to. If the United States moved and said Taiwan's now independent, then China will go to defend. They will defend and say, no, that is ours. We'll take that economic risk to defend, but they're not going to just come out of the blue one day and say, you know what, March 1st, we're going to launch this amphibious invasion and we're going to start bombing Taiwan. You got to remember as well, Fujian province, which is the province right across the Taiwan Strait. These are filled with people. They speak the same dialect, right? People in Fujian speak the same dialect as they do in Taiwan, and there is a tremendous amount of families that are living families. Half the family in Taiwan, half the family in China. You got to remember this is not. They're Chinese. These are Chinese people, right? So this is like brothers killing brothers. We're not going to just go in and start bombing the crap out of Taiwan and start slaughtering all these people. You want your brothers to kill your brother? It doesn't make sense. And even another point in that, even Xi Jinping, if you look at his political career, he spent 19 years in the Fujian province. Number one thing that he did was building economic trade with Taiwan. His whole thing was economics. Let's build more trade. So I think that, this is something that, when you go to Taiwan, I've been to Taiwan many times, and, there's a lot of people in Taiwan, especially the older generation, that are saying, I got a lot of respect for China. Like, look at what they've done economically. Like, you go to Taipei, it's a beautiful city, but it's very slow. It's not very modern. It's actually kind of going back in time. It's like going back to it's going back to Shanghai in the 1990s. There's a couple nice buildings. It's very much like a village. Slow pace of life. It's very quiet. And so a lot of Taiwanese, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese that choose to live and work in mainland China because it's like, man, China's booming. Like, China's economy is great. Chinese, look at how fast everything's developing. It's a much more modern and great quality of life in China. And so I think, like, there's a lot of more nuance that you need to understand between that. But again, those are kind of my reasons why I don't think China is going to invade Taiwan. Number one, it's brothers on brothers. Number two, it's an extremely difficult invasion. Number three, what's the benefit? What do they possibly gain from doing that?
Yeah, and there's too few people actually do that part of the analysis. To why would you do that? They just want to have this big boogeyman up there that I don't know. Who knows what the real reason is? Maybe it's just sell more arms. I guess it could be. But the bottom line is that there does not need to be any war between the U.S., China, and Taiwan, period. And I think the more we move in the direction of realize there's much mutual benefit for all those people to just keep your differences and keep them on the diplomatic and political side and keep the military out of it. It'll be better for everybody.
Absolutely. And, one final word is, I think, when we look at, the United States think tanks here in Washington, D.C., there's a couple that are pretty good, I would imagine. Like for example, I would say the Brookings Institute, the gentleman that runs that is Ryan Haas. I find him to have a very good knowledge of China. I mean, he used to live in China for many years. He speaks Chinese. He has a good knowledge. And again, he would be very much along those same lines of, going against what Michael Pompeo is saying, just saying like, look, that's not what you need to do. And a lot of it really is it comes down to diplomacy, better diplomacy. And if we can really solve that by better communication, better diplomacy, that's how you're going to improve the U.S.-China relationship. And again, the whole Taiwan issue here, again, if you want to solve Taiwan, improve the U.S.-China relationship. That's what's going to ultimately
100% agree with that. Well, Cyrus, thanks so much for coming on to the show today and enlightening us with a lot of this information that we just wouldn't get anywhere else. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us the deep dive on what's really going on between China, the U.S., and Taiwan. Thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that's it for us today. We will see you tomorrow. We've got some other really good shows. We got Mike Domino coming up later in the week. You're not going to want to miss his views. We also have Ambassador Chaz Freeman coming back Matt Ho. We missed him last week, but he'll be back. And all these things you can find on our channel. Just keep looking for those, and we will keep giving you the information you need to make sense of your life. Thanks, like and subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.